Hey everyone, and welcome right into today's Explainer. We're diving straight into a really fascinating crossover today, the intersection of ancient Eastern philosophy and Western economics. We're going to be looking closely at this concept of Bodhisattva capitalism and stacking it up against the Western social contract view of distribution. We've got some pretty profound ideas to unpack about wealth, fairness, and how our societies are actually structured.
So it really begs a massive question, doesn't it? Can ancient philosophy actually solve modern inequality? We live in a world that's constantly grappling with huge economic disparities and environmental crises. Could the actual answers to these highly modern problems be hiding in texts that were written thousands of years ago? Well, that is exactly the intellectual journey we're going on today. It's a quest for a problem-solution framework that bridges the East and the West.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for the explainer. First, introducing Bodhisattva capitalism. Second, the social contract view. Third, comparing these distribution philosophies. Fourth, flaws and improvements. And finally, a sustainable economic future.
Section 1. Introducing Bodhi Capitalism. Right, so we are rooting our discussion today firmly in Buddhist economic thought. But listen, this isn't just about spirituality, it's a very specific economic framework. You see, unlike traditional Western capitalism, which, let's face it, hyper-focuses on production and efficiency, Bodhisattva capitalism is this ethics-centered economy. It heavily prioritizes fair distribution over production. It's an economic outlook entirely based on mutual altruism and that Bodhisattva spirit, really emphasizing human duty, communal welfare, and the natural cyclicity of things.
To really get this, we need to demystify a pretty crucial piece of philosophical jargon, dependent origination. Basically, in this view, absolutely nothing exists independently. All beings, all phenomena, they're intimately connected through mutual causal relationships. So when you apply that to economics, it means wealth and property just do not exist in a vacuum. Your wealth is intimately tied to the community around you. And because of this deep interconnectedness, class distinctions aren't acknowledged at all, and fair distribution becomes a strict moral imperative. Now, you might be thinking this sounds totally alien to Western thought. Actually, no. It's fascinating how these concepts permeated Western philosophy over the centuries. Back in the 1500s, Matteo Ricci introduced Buddhism to the West. In fact, the Bodhisattva was known in medieval Europe as Josaphat. Fast forward to the 1700s, and Immanuel Kant's theories on ethics actually mirrored Buddhist concepts of emptiness and zero. And by the 1800s, heavyweights like Schopenhauer and Nietzsche were adapting Buddhist thought into their own writings on will, suffering, and self-salvation. So how does this philosophy actually translate into a working economy? Well, ancient Buddhist thought holds a cyclic view of the universe: formation, abiding, decay, emptiness. And this translates incredibly well into a modern economic cycle. Formation is basically saving. Abiding represents production. Decay is the circulation of goods, and emptiness represents distribution. It's a continuous cyclical process, and the ultimate goal is always that final step: proper, fair distribution. Section 2, the social contract view. Let's look at the Western perspective. Bridging this ancient worldview with modern state policy, it is absolutely fascinating to put the Buddha's distribution policy side by side with John Rawls, who is, of course, one of the most prominent Western political philosophers of the 20th century. There's a surprising, almost incredible similarity here. Both frameworks firmly believe that social problems stem directly from economic inequality. Consequently, both argue the state absolutely must step in to realize social fairness. Just like Rawls argued that a fair society has to maximize the welfare of its lowest income class, Buddhist policy emphasizes that exact same moral imperative of distribution. Let's anchor these abstract ideas in some real-world policy. The ancient Buddhist text, the Kuddhadanta Sutta, outlines a remarkably modern economic strategy for true empowerment. It explicitly advises against just throwing temporary poor relief at a problem. Instead, it says you have to build a true foundation for self-reliance. This meant the state should provide a production base for poor farmers, offer capital support to merchants, and pay proper wages to employees. It's all about systemic economic support, not just slapping a Band-Aid on poverty. And honestly, what's wild here is how perfectly this ancient thought aligns with classical Western economics, specifically Adam Smith's labor theory of value. Following a logical progression from labor input to value creation and ultimately to fair distribution and recirculation, both Smith and Buddhist philosophy entirely agree that the source of value is human labor. A good is worth more simply because more labor was invested in it. Plain and simple. To really summarize that connection, just think of the old phrase, you reap what you sow. Because of the principle of dependent origination, remember that deep interconnectedness we talked about? People should receive fair distribution as a direct, equitable reward for their labor. It's viewed as a fundamental principle of both cosmic and economic fairness.
Section 3. Comparing distribution philosophies. Now that we have the foundations, let's systematically contrast them. This is where we find the fundamental of philosophical divergence. Bodhisattva Capitalism centers heavily on circulation, communal solidarity, and this idea of infinite mutual interdependence. Your welfare is viewed through the lens of ethical duty and paying back grace to the community. On the flip side, social contractarianism centers heavily on individual freedom, justice, and the strict observance of contracts. It envisions a welfare state that guarantees a minimum income based on your individual rights rather than communal duty. So the crucial point is how this breaks down conceptually. If we look at the theory, Buddhism relies on dependent origination for fair distribution, while the social contract relies on prioritizing fairness over pure market efficiency. In their view of the state, Buddhism envisions a perfectly neutral state maintaining social fairness, whereas the social contract envisions a basic social security state. And while both utilize a labor theory of value, Buddhism sees it as a requital of grace, paying it back, while the social contract sees it as a justification for maintaining a minimum individual income.
Look, they both sound like really noble, compelling ways to organize a society. But it leads us to ask the obvious question. Are either of these systems actually perfect? Can we just copy and paste one of them into our modern world and solve all our problems?
Section 4. Flaws and improvements.
When examining these frameworks, we need to impartially look at what the sources identify as flaws, because neither is without significant real-world challenges. For Bodhisattva capitalism, the boundaries of dependent origination are incredibly opaque. Think about it. In a massive, hyper-complex modern global society, how on earth do you map out who owes what to whom? Plus, its huge focus on distribution can sometimes lead to a lack of efficiency, lowered innovation, and weakened economic growth. Conversely, social contractarianism has its own modern crises. There's often a total lack of justification or countermeasures when the social contract is simply breached or broken by those in power. Furthermore, as we've seen in crises following the collapse of communism, it can breed a deep distrust of humanity when society is reduced purely to contractual obligations rather than genuine human connections. But here is the beauty of doing a comparative analysis. We can actually fix these flaws by borrowing the strengths of the opposing system. The text suggests we can mutually improve by integrating these philosophies. We need to extend Western individual liberation to include Eastern respect for the community. We need to enforce not just individual rights, but the observance of duty and solidarity. Essentially, we have to recover the spirit of communal bonds that purely contractual relationships sometimes erase.
Section 5. A sustainable economic future.
Let's move ahead and see how this builds into an integrated approach. The goal for our future economic systems should really be combining Buddhism's circulation and community-centered thought with social contractarianism's justice and duty-centered thought. By balancing communal distribution with individual duty, we create a superior, highly resilient economic ethics system. We get the innovation and justice of the West with the solidarity and fairness of the East. To conclude our journey, let's look at arguably the biggest crisis of our modern era, the environment. This hybrid framework actually offers a sustainable fix here too. By adopting an ecological economic outlook, one based on the Buddhist cyclical nature of reality where everything is connected and resources are not just infinite, we can resolve both environmental crises and the human alienation caused by modern hypercapitalism. It is a powerful way to reinterpret value and recover true fairness in distribution. I want to leave you with this provocative final thought. How can we build an economic model where humanity and nature achieve a truly harmonious coexistence? The fusion of Bodhisattva capitalism and social contractuarianism gives us an incredible blueprint for this. It challenges us to look at our wealth, our labor, and our neighbors in a profoundly connected way. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope it sparked your curiosity to learn more about how we can apply these hybrid principles to shape a much better future.